All right. Welcome to the special series of Muscle Science for Women, where we are talking about getting older and how great it is. and we're on episode 2. I'm here with my good friend, Beth Lipton. And we thought that as a, recap, because these are coming out, I would say probably once a month. Our first episode was sort of an intro, and we're talking a little bit about fitness through the decades. And we thought we'd kind of switch it up and go in a different direction with this episode and talk about relationships and how they impact our health. And that's a huge conversation that could probably be, a series all in its own. But we thought we'd just kind of like touch on it and chat and talk about it because it's probably one of the areas. I mean, certainly we don't talk about it a ton in our regular programming here at Muscle Science for Women. And it's something that I think is kind of underserved as a topic as it relates to health. Like relationships and talking about healthy relationships is a big market. It's a big topic, but how it directly relates to our health and our health as we go through life, I think, is just a topic that maybe we don't see or hear so much. And I think it's very cool that you and I are having this conversation because we are friends and we met through the health industry. And so we can kind of talk about it from a lot of different angles. So I'm excited to have this chat with you. How are you doing, by the way? How's life today for you?
Life is good. Yeah, no, life
Yeah,
is good.
good,
Yeah. What about
good.
you?
Well, you just saw offline that I had my little boy running
The
around here. Just woke
sweetest.
up from his nap and he's not feeling it. Spring here in beautiful Nova Scotia is a really rough season.
Mm.
It's like very windy and rainy and cold still, but
Mm.
you have the hope that it won't be soon. So it's almost harder than winter because in winter you're just like, it is what it is. And here it's like you'll have like one beautiful sunny day and it gives you this false hope, and then it's like miserable for 7 days straight. So we're all
Uh,
just kind of like, waiting for summer to come. But
yeah.
I am feeling a little bit of like just, with spring and the changing of the season and things growing and coming alive, I'm starting to feel a little bit of that myself. I don't know if you get like this, like cyclically with the seasons, but like I'm starting to feel like, you know, there will be days when I can not wear a coat to go outside, and that's making
Hmm.
me feel good and making me like, I don't know, more invigorated for my workouts. And it's making me just feel a little bit of hope. Like the days that the sun comes and like hits my skin, it's so transformative. And I know that
Yeah.
especially Canadians, like there are people in the US that have the situation too, but especially Canadians and people who live in cold places where we really are not getting much like sunshine or warmth for a significant portion of the year. When the sun comes out, we do not know how to act. Like we go outside and just like stand like this in front of the sun. Like it's really transformative. So anyway, we're getting
I,
close, but we're
well,
not quite there yet.
I do love the spring, and because I am just not a cold weather beast at all. I just can't take the cold. But April is a very fraught month for me because the beginning of April is my kid's birthday. She is turning 15 next week, which is crazy because
Wow.
I had her precisely 15 minutes ago. Um, but the end of the month was my mother's birthday. So like it starts with a really happy event. And for those of you listening, my mom passed away in 2019 and we were super close. So so it starts on a big high note and it ends on kind of a sad note. So it's just kind of
Mm.
like a very emotionally fraught month
Mhm.
for me. So
Mhm.
I love the
Yeah.
spring, but I sort of, love April and dread April at the same time.
Yeah, that's a lot of ups and downs for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, it kind of like brings to mind a little bit of this aging process and cycle of life thing that we're talking about with this series, and also
Hmm.
relationships because of the amazing relationships that you have with both of those women. So
Yeah.
um let's talk about relationships. So first of all, I don't know how much we're going to get into like specifics, but obviously we can touch on, primary partnerships and romantic relationships and
Hmm.
friendships and also relationships with, family members. But how they, I guess we want to kind of dive into how they can improve or support our health, and how conversely not having those relationships or having dysfunctional relationships can negatively impact your health. And
Right.
then also how that concept can shift and change as we get older, and maybe also how it shifts and changes reflecting culture, because culture is changing and how we interact with each other and engage with each other is changing. And across cultures, that changes too. Like, I think we all
Definitely.
know, and people who are listening, but if you've done a lot of traveling outside of, most of the listeners, I think, are in North America, but if you travel outside of North America into different countries and different cultures, they have definitely different ways of engaging with their community and with their families and
Hmm.
with their loved ones. And there maybe different cultures have maybe stronger community-based culture, which can have a really positive impact. So these are all the things that we can talk about. I almost don't know really where to start. I mean, maybe we can start with some of the
I think,
more kind of,
well, I
yeah,
think
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I think we should start with why this is relevant to health.
Mm-hmm,
Because ultimately muscle science for women is about health.
mm-hmm,
And so, I mean, I became interested in this topic because I actually was listening to a podcast a while ago and heard a couple of years ago and heard Vivek Murthy, who's the US Surgeon General, talking about the topic of loneliness, which he had written a book about. And I sort of knew, because we all kind of know that there's this epidemic of loneliness. I think we all kind of just know it by osmosis. Either we're experiencing it or we just kind of feel it all around us. But he was talking about this epidemic of chronic loneliness and how damaging it is to our health. And he compares it to the physical ramifications being akin to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is shocking. But then again, if you think about it, like looking through the lens of ancestral health, you know, 10,000 years ago, however long ago, if you were sort of ousted from the tribe, you would die. So we experience a physical stress response when we feel lonely. So you kind of feel chronically lonely, then you're going to feel chronic stress. And we all know what some of the ramifications are of chronic stress, inflammation, disease, even shorter life. So loneliness is not just like a thing that is unpleasant. It actually is something that very directly impacts our health.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, and continuing with that, there are studies, and we can link some stuff and put some articles in the show notes about how, social disconnection is connected to things like higher instances of heart disease and stroke and dementia, which makes a lot of sense because, again, if you're not sort of using your brain in a lot of these different ways, that can sort of impact you negatively. It's hard for me to connect how bad social disconnection is, like, compared to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, but it's partly because one is seems so much more tangible than the other. One is a
Hmm.
quote unquote bad thing you're doing versus
Hmm.
one is something you're not doing, which is like nurturing and having these relationships or finding opportunities to kind of have the social connection. So it's crazy to think about, and it's hard for me to like get my head around it. And also, as someone who is pretty introverted, and it's we're all on a scale, right? Like, we all of course need human connection and need loving relationships that make us feel valued and loved and all of those things, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, of course. But there is a sliding scale of maybe how much, how frequent, what type
Hmm.
of that kind of connection. And I remember, like, thinking back to in previous years when my husband was still in the military and he was deployed 6 months of the year, at least every year for years. And there would be times when I would like not talk to a person on the phone. Like, I wouldn't call a friend, I wouldn't call a family member, I wouldn't talk to him for 5 6 days in a row. And I'd be just
Hmm.
kind of like going autopilot through my life, and I'd be like, what's going on? Like, am I here? Am I miserable? Am I not? And I wouldn't even notice.
Hmm.
And but it's like, it's not because I felt sad. It was almost like a lack of feeling good. Do you
Hmm.
see, like, kind of the difference?
Definitely.
But to
Yep.
one of your points, like, we were making some notes and talking about this episode offline. I was still talking to people at the gym. I'd go to the gym every day. I was still
Hmm.
going places and getting my grocery. Like, I was still having some of these little like snippets of social interaction. And
Hmm.
as you were saying, one of the things that's happening with technology and culture and, the future arriving, is that we're we're automating a lot of our social connections now. So like, you don't talk to people at the gas station anymore. You do your own self checkout at all these stores, and like these little tiny bits, especially for people who don't have otherwise strong social groups or connections, like these little things here and there, like that can really add up and make a big difference, positively or
Yeah,
negatively, if you're missing them,
definitely.
right? um
Yeah. And you said something before about, somebody who doesn't have a lot of social connection isn't necessarily nurturing them. But I feel like, you can kind of look at that another way. Sometimes we don't have good relationships for other reasons. Like it may not be that you don't desire those relationships, but, a lot of people have social anxiety. They may have fraught relationships with family members, which led to having fewer friendships. Like there could be any number of reasons why people don't have those connections. And you're right. Then you sort of factor in the fact that we're removing even the small social interactions, and what you end up with is some really chronically lonely people.
yeah.
And then also, because we're talking about getting older, there's also that factor. I mean, in my research for this episode, I read something that said that you have the most number of friends you're going to have in your life for most people when you're 25. And then, as you get older, those relationships change. You may have fewer friends, but they may be closer. You have less time. Maybe you have a family, you have a busier job, whatever's going on. So you have fewer and fewer friendships. But, again, maybe those are closer friendships. Maybe they're not. But as we get older, I mean, especially like at my stage, like my parents are both gone, but like a lot of my friends, contemporaries have children living in the house, whether they're small children or teenagers, but then they also have aging parents that they're dealing with. And that leaves very little time, that plus work, plus whatever else, it leaves very little time for, socializing. So people kind of, their friendships kind of slip away because of that situation. So there's like any number of reasons why people have fewer
Yeah.
and fewer friendships. But it's really disturbing when you read the stats, like something like 15% of American adults say they don't have a single friend that they could call in an emergency, which is just awful. I mean, aside from that, the health ramifications of that, it's just when I think about that, I'm just filled with
It's
sadness for
heartbreaking.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
heartbreaking.
Mhm. I'm also interested in potential distinctions between men and women here, not because I feel like we have to constantly kind of say men versus women, but I do feel like I've seen more. There is some, I don't know if this is real or if it's cultural programming or if it's just marketing or whatever, but there's sort of a feeling that women are more social creatures, right? And so men tend more towards loneliness. Women tend to communicate more or better. This is just, again, the overarching narrative that I hear. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily the truth. Um, and so we do have a better grasp on like maintaining friendships or nurturing friendships or seeking out friendships. And, you've seen maybe some things in more recent times about specifically male loneliness and young men and the way social media is kind of screwing people over and how, it's really a problem for men. But in some of these studies we were reading, it was showing that it's actually more likely that women identify as feeling lonely. So I don't know if that means, I don't know, then there's like sort of the identification part of it. So maybe men don't recognize they feel lonely, or maybe they do
Mhm.
and they don't want to admit it.
Mhm.
And I wonder too, across generations, how this is going to be different, because so my parents' generation, so people who are kind of in their like 60s, later 60s, maybe early 70s, anecdotally, it seems to me that it's much more common to see men of that age with no friends, no
Mhm.
friends. And women, maybe through work or whatever, like they've got a couple friends that they can go out and have lunch or do things with. But I don't know if that's, again, just sort of the people that I'm around, or if that's something that's true.
Oh no,
I
there's a
don't know.
comedian, there's a comedian who does a whole, I don't remember his name, but he does a whole thing about that. He's like, my dad has no friends. And he's like, and
Yeah.
your dad has no friends. They have the husbands of your mom's
Yeah.
friends, but they don't have their
Yeah.
own friends. He does like a
That's
whole bit on it. I wish I could remember who it was. I'm sorry for not being able to credit him, but It's
It's
funny, but it's
really
also sort of
interesting.
not funny, you know?
No, yeah, it's sad, but it's also like some of this is really subjective too, because again, are more women saying they're lonely because more women are willing to say they're lonely? Do men and women have different thresholds for what they consider lonely? I mean, I'm sure across individuals
Mhm.
there are different thresholds, but I just think that would be an interesting, and maybe there is more research and we can look into it, but it's interesting to parse out that, because we're talking about, it's muscle science for women. So we're focusing on women here. But I was surprised when I read that article that it said women are more likely to say they're lonely than men. That surprised me because I do see
Right.
more men who struggle with having friendships, who don't actually have a lot of friends, who have a hard time with that, especially as we get older. And so I'm thinking, like, is that just because they don't want to say that they're lonely, or are they really not as lonely? Do they really require less
Yeah,
social
I also
connection?
I wonder what their expectations are as well. Like, I think we expect ourselves to have friends and to have that kind of like community and support and to be able to give that community and support. And I don't know whether or not men have those same expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And also how much men expect to lean on the women I mean, in heterosexual couples,
Mm-hmm.
how much they just expect to lean on the women in their lives to provide that socializing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't have any
Yeah.
specific expertise on that, but then if you think about like, what you were just saying, like people in your parents' generation, the men seem to have fewer friends. Like they also set that example then for their sons. So it
Mm-hmm.
becomes, it kind of compounds itself. And I think social media makes the whole thing worse because, of course, on social media, we talk about this all the time about how it's like other people's highlight reels, but you see people like going on vacations together and having like, girls' weekends and you're not there. And what does that do? It makes you feel more lonely.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether or not those girls' weekends or those trips or whatever really are as great as they look on Instagram, who knows? But
Mm-hmm.
um,
I also wonder too if, like, as a millennial here, and I'm trying not to just like, you could say I'm like centering myself. Also, I'm just only speaking to my experience because that's the only one I know. But I feel like we're in a weird bubble in between the like maybe boomer generations, where again, different culture and less friends and less willing to seek help or ask for help or ask whatever. And then there's the younger generation that, on one hand, you would assume they're going to be more social just because they're younger, but they grew up with social media in a way that millennials, and what's your generation? What do you guys call yourselves? What are you? Gen X? What are you? I
yes.
can't remember. I can't keep track of them all. Anyway,
That's the most Gen X thing in the world that you can't even remember what we're called.
so maybe I'm a little stepping
Thank you
into
for
your lane
proving our
too.
point.
Yeah. Anyway,
But
but
kids,
we
the Gen Z generation also, they were kids for the pandemic. So
that too. That
I mean,
too. So
my kid was 10 when COVID hit. So that is, I mean, everybody suffered during the pandemic. And like, I don't mean to make it out like my kid had it worse than anybody else, but just like the end of fifth grade. I mean, it's like the beginning of, the beginning of those like tween, whatever, types of years. So, but I mean, even for little kids, it's the same thing. And older, high school kids, it's the same. Like, I think any kid who had, 2+ years of being separated from their peers, um, that also
yeah.
didn't help with socializing. And I mean, so many more kids now have social anxiety. How much of that is social media? How much of it is COVID? Who
Yeah.
knows?
I wonder for older people, and by that I just mean like adults. So really people sort of like, I'm going to just say arbitrarily like 25 and up. How can we like, how many of us are using, I'm just going to say this, and before people get worked up, let me explain, but are we using the pandemic or COVID as an excuse for not nurturing the relationships, or for potentially antisocial or whatever behavior? And I'm just going to say this because I can't parse out what part of COVID impacted me versus just the time of life that I was in, because I was literally at a tipping point, a very distinct tipping point in my own personal life at the pandemic, where I was in Canada full time and I had a kid, and also entering sort of late 30s, like this era where it seems very like rife with a switching of priorities to the point where you make a plan with your friends 6 months in advance and then you cancel it and you're kind of relieved, like that kind of vibe. So
Mhm.
I can't separate that, like my own life changes with the pandemic. Like I don't know if my life would be any different if the pandemic hit or not socially, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
but I wonder how many of us at this point, like if you are a true extrovert who gets your energy and your happiness from spending time with people and being out and about, I can't imagine how awful the pandemic was for you. But did that really change those people or not? I don't know. And like for those of us who it's kind of just easier for us not to go out or make plans or do things, and we want to, but it's also kind of a relief when we don't have to, like those kind of people. Did the pandemic actually make us less social or more afraid to be social? Or was it just kind of like, now I don't have to. And now I'm just going to continue to not have to for the rest of my life, even though the pandemic's over. Like, I wonder, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know. I don't know. I do think that, and this is not scientific, but I do get the feeling that all of us, no matter where you fit on the loneliness spectrum and no matter where you fit on the introvert extrovert spectrum, I think all of us are still struggling with our relationships. And our friendships, our personal, like our one-on-one relationships, our sort of primary, I think all of it is in flux. That's just the feeling that I get. And from talking to others, it seems like that's like we're all there. And I can't think of what else would cause that except the pandemic, just this interruption. And I'm not saying that there weren't, I mean, the pandemic, look, it was awful, but there were some bright spots, definitely. But I do think that that combined with social media, combined with all the ways that we are stepping away from these interactions, like we were talking about earlier, I think you put all of these things together, and what you end up with is a bunch of people who are wired to connect with each other and not connecting with each other. And it's
Yeah.
messing with all of us.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think social media is a even bigger problem for social, like the social aspect than the pandemic was, because I mean, first of all, it's just forever. It keeps going. It was there before the pandemic. It'll be there after the pandemic. But,
mhm,
um, the pandemic in some ways, of course, again, I can't speak to everyone's experience. There were people who couldn't be with their loved ones for prolonged periods of time, who were stuck, like horrible, horrible circumstances. But for many of us, we found ways to connect with the people that we cared about. And in some ways, it kind of helped focus on what was really important. Like you were saying, there's bright spots that can be found, but social media seems to have just like a continually growing net negative effect on so many
mhm,
people. And I
yeah,
think it's worth noting too that we talk a lot about how social media is bad for kids, and I fully believe that. I can't imagine being a 13-year-old in today's online landscape and how it can impact their growing brains and forming brains and the relationships and all that stuff. But we
mhm,
can't discount that it's bad for older people too.
yeah,
And there is an entire generation of, again, my parents' age people who cannot stop doom scrolling Facebook. Like,
mhm,
I don't even know how Facebook works anymore, honestly. Like, I couldn't tell you where my mother is finding the articles that she's finding on Facebook and then passing along to me. I don't know how, but it's wild. And it's so prevalent that there's an entire, and again, the irony of this is not lost on me that I'm going to be talking about a account on social media that is funny, that is talking about this, but there's somebody who is on, I'm sure she's on TikTok, she's on Instagram, and her whole shtick is pretending to be a boomer mom and how they engage with life. And this very like everything, like you can't like allow yourself to be happy and you have to be like negative and complain about everything, but they like talk about like Facebook, there's like an entire news feed dedicated to just hideous news from around the world. So this mom will be like, "Did you hear about this woman who got hit 4 times in one day by different cars?" Like, and it's like, "Mom, where did you get that?" And it's like across the world, and it's like some weird
right,
news site that doesn't even exist. But
yeah,
like, this is the stuff that they're being sent, and this is what they're spending their time on. This is what they're
Yeah.
reading and taking into their brains every day. And
Yeah.
it's addictive. And it started out with a social media page where people could post pictures of their family for their friends to see. And
Yeah.
this is what it is now for a lot of people.
You know, it's funny. My meditation teacher, Emily Fletcher, talks about this, about how, and this sort of harkens back to where we started with ancestral health. She talks about how, you know, our ancient ancestors, if something happened, something terrible happened, and it was outside your immediate, like within a 1 mile radius of your home, it might take months or years for you to hear about it, if you ever heard about it at all. And now there could be like a traffic accident in New Zealand. And, you know, if there's something remarkable about it, you'll hear about it in Nova Scotia.
Mhm.
And so what ends up happening is we are overrun with this deluge of bad news, and it's always bad news. And we are just simply not wired for
No.
that amount of information, and especially that amount of negative information.
Mhm.
So, and again, like you will have a stress response, even
Mhm.
though it has nothing to do with you, you will
Mhm.
still have a stress response.
Yep.
So again, we're like ratcheting up that stress response over something that arguably we should not even know about. Um,
Correct. And how
so
this relates to relationships too is that this is how we are engaging with each other online. So if you even
mhm,
want to make the argument of like, but Facebook is still good and Instagram is still good because I get to keep up with my friends and I get to whatever, like, you know, as well as I do. I mean, obviously this is an overgeneralization. There is positivity online and we find it and we
sure,
do the best we can to, you know, perpetuate that. But by and large, the stuff that's going viral is negative stuff. It's going
mhm,
viral because someone posts something that they know is going to get a triggering or provocative reaction from people, so that people attack it and people are miserable and people are angry and people are sharing negativity, and like
mhm,
that's what people are seeing the most. Do you know that?
yeah.
Okay, I don't even know if I want to go down this road, but today I literally got in my algorithm on Instagram, I was getting sent Andrew Tate videos. You know who this
Oh,
guy
good
is?
God, of course. Oh
In
God,
what in what world would an algorithm send that stuff to me except to
piss you
upset
off.
me or
Yeah.
anger me?
And to get you to comment.
Like that is, and like these people know
Hmm.
what they're doing. These social media account, the powers that be that create these algorithms know that.
Hmm.
They, if
Yep.
they knew what they were doing and they wanted to send me stuff that made me happy, they would send me food and babies and baby monkeys and baby monkeys eating food. Okay, that's what they would send me. And
I want that
instead,
Instagram.
right, don't we
Yeah.
all? And
Yeah.
instead, like, but it was so far, like even send me, you know, something that's provocative but in line with who I am on social media.
Yeah.
Send me something weird about fitness or send me some vegan stuff or something. But to send
Yeah.
me this disgusting, like, it's wild. And I'm just like, so this is how they're changing our brains. And
Yeah.
people who aren't thinking about it are just
Yeah.
allowing it. They're going on and getting angry. And to your point again, it's like, this is raising our cortisol. This is making us unhappy. And we get pissed off online, and that carries up into our real world and how we interact in the real world. And yeah, this is just like a condemnation of like social media in general, I
Right.
guess. But it's a problem. And I mean, we have to, if we want to start maybe moving this conversation into some more, I guess, more positive but also more like practical conversations, like what are some things that we can do to
Hmm.
nurture our relationships, to seek out good relationships? Because it's another thing, as people get older, there's also this conversation of it's harder to find relationships or make new ones or whatever.
It
And I have
is. Hmm.
friends my age who are still looking for romantic partners and are saying like, I literally, the only way to do it is to get on a dating app, and the
Hmm.
pickings are slim and it's not good. um, but you know, people who want to make new friends. I just moved to a new place. Like, this where I live now is technically where I'm from, but I haven't lived here in 20 years and I live in a different area. You know, I'm trying to make new friends here, or new social connections or family connections, people with kids, whatever. You know, people struggle when you're not in a time in your life maybe where you're forced to meet new people all the time, like you're going to school or something. it gets harder and harder.
It
So
does.
what are some things that we can do to not be drawn in by social media, to nurture relationships we already have, to get out of relationships that suck, to find new ones? Like, what do we do?
No, it's a great question. It's a great question. And I feel like it's, it is, I have like been reading a lot of articles about this and have been sort of, I've immersed myself a little bit. I've written some articles, in this idea of loneliness and its connection to mental health. And so I am not a mental health expert myself, but just in doing all this reading and stuff and research, um, it seems like this is a question that comes up a lot because, often the talk is about sort of nurturing the relationships you already have. And the answer that comes up is like, well, I don't have any. So how do you create them? And one of the, I mean, I talk about this all the time about like one of the many reasons why I'm so grateful for our friendship is that I was in my, mid 40s when we met. And so it really is unusual to make a new friend, especially a really good friend, the older you get. So, again, I'm just very happy that we're friends.
Worked out well for
Um,
us.
um, but the advice that seems to come up a lot is to get yourself out. So whether it's like if you happen to have a certain faith, then to join, a church, a synagogue, a mosque, whatever your sort of type of faith is, you don't have to become super religious. You don't have to like force yourself. You don't have to go every Sunday or every Friday or whatever your day is like, but just join and start showing up like here and there. And often those organizations have social activities. And they tend to be welcoming because, just because of sort of the context. So if that is something that is available to you, that's one outlet. Another is to do volunteer work, which helps on two fronts. So for one thing, you're meeting people because you're in a new environment and you're meeting people who are like-minded who are also volunteering. But also you get this lift. It's colloquially called the helper's high. But just as we are wired for social connection, we are also wired to get a boost of serotonin and all of our happiness hormones when we help others. Again, because when you were in the tribe, if you had those good relationships, you were more likely to survive. So that carries over into today. When you help someone else out, you get a lift. And we all know that. Like anytime you've done something kind for someone else, you get that like happy feeling. So volunteering, no matter what your sort of thing is another way to meet people and have those social interactions. And to also sort of just work that muscle a little bit, because for some people, if you have not been social for a while, or if you have social anxiety, it can be really, really hard to do those things, to take that step. And with something like volunteering, you don't have to make small talk with people because you're there to do some sort of a job. So it takes that aspect out of it.
Can
And
I interrupt here
yeah,
just because
please.
on this line of thinking, because you
Yeah.
also made a point offline about how we all love to be asked to help and it makes us feel good, this helper's high that you talk about, but conversely we all hate to ask for it. And I think that that's really like similar to a lot of things in the rest of the podcast that I feel like I have to hammer home over and over again. Eat your protein, don't do too much HIIT cardio, like stuff like that. But I feel like I have to say
Yeah.
a million times because people just really have a hard time accepting it for
Yeah.
themselves. It's one of those things that you can accept for other people, but not for yourself. And I think that
Totally.
that's a really, really difficult point, and it's going to be so uncomfortable and so hard. But if you just flex the muscle a little bit, even in little areas, like if you hate to ask for help, if you hate to quote unquote admit weakness or say that you can't do something, or you'd like some help because it would make you feel good or whatever, or you'd like some company or you'd like whatever, it makes you feel uncomfortable. Try it in like little bits and snippets where it's not too scary or not too big of an ask or not too big of a thing until you get like a little bit more comfortable, and just knowing that chances are this person is going to want to hear that from you, and that person's going to feel better to be asked, and it's a
Well,
good thing that you're doing.
think about how you feel when somebody asks for your help. It makes you feel
Exactly.
good. If they ask for your advice, it makes you feel good, right?
And a
So you're
really
doing that for someone else.
Yeah, and a really like a similar something that's coming up for me right now that is very directly related to this is, you know, I said I moved here. I had a good sort of social group in Ottawa just because I had lived there for a while and a lot of my good friends live there. And, you know, I moved back here thinking it was going to be quite easy because I do still have some good friends here too. And and because I'm not an overly demanding social person. I was like, it wasn't a worry moving. I was like, oh, I'm not scared that I'm moving to some place where I know no one and I'm not going to have any help. But I noticed in the first sort of few months of moving back that like I wasn't really being that social. I wasn't doing a lot. I wasn't feeling like I was being asked to do a lot. I was just kind of feeling like, oh, you know, and because I live like in the country, I'm not, you know, in Ottawa, I was right downtown. I could drive 10 minutes and be at a number of people's homes and hang out. And it was just easier. Right. So I recently was like having lunch with somebody and I had a conversation with her where I was basically saying the general gist was like, I would like you, if you're thinking about like you want to go out or be social or have lunch or do things, like think of me, basically. And it was hard for me to do that because I don't want, I have this sort of irrational, immature thing where I don't want people to think that I'm lonely or a loser or don't have any friends or something, or feel like I'm a high maintenance friend or something like that. And I know that a lot of my friends, my personal friends off online, think that I'm, you know, they believe that I'm a very like low maintenance friend who doesn't really need to be social a lot and doesn't need a lot of upkeep. But sometimes that bites me in the ass because people don't think of me for a lot of these things. So I said to her, and it wasn't like a confrontational, you don't include me or I'm feeling excluded. It was just like, hey, if you know, you're doing stuff, like think of me, I'm over here too. Like I'd like to be included. And it wasn't the easiest thing for me to say. And I think she was a little bit surprised when I said it, but it wasn't a confrontational, it wasn't a negative thing. And she was like, oh, good. And literally, like the next week, we got some girls together and did something and hung out. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can do it. We're not just telling you to do stuff that we wouldn't do ourselves. Like sometimes it can feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable, but what comes from it is pretty much always going to be better than not taking that step, you know?
You know, 100%. I just had a very similar experience. I volunteered at my kids' school for an event last week. Um, and in doing so, I was in a group of, it happened to be all women, but all of them volunteer together all the time. And I'm like a more intermittent person. So I sort of walked into this group of people who all knew each other really well. Fortunately, they were all very friendly and didn't make me feel, you know, weird at all. And it was a very long thing. So we took a break to go get dinner in between our sort of work on this thing. And it came up that a couple of the women like really, really love to go to the theater and will go see like anything. And I was like, oh my God, I'll see anything. And they were like, really? And I was like, no, no, I will go see anything. And so we formed a group chat and we already have tickets
Nice.
to a show together. So I feel like, and similar to you, like I, you know, I struggle. Part of the reason I don't volunteer at school all the time is because I find it intimidating and it can be very cliquey or it has been in the past. I haven't found that to be the case at this school, but in other places it's cliquey and I don't know. It's not a natural thing for me to sort of put myself out there in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, my kid's older now, so I don't meet the parents as often. There aren't as many events at
Yeah.
school. You don't necessarily meet your kids' friends' parents the way you
Mm-hmm.
do when they're younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to have more of a community at school, so I volunteered for this thing. And the theater thing, like it was almost like before I could stop myself, I was like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'll see anything."
Yeah.
And it just ended up being this really nice connection. And now I'm going to this show with two of the women. So,
That's
um,
cool.
yeah. And you know, separately. I was at the gym the other day and there was a woman there. I go to one spinning class a week. It's like dessert for me. Because most of the time I'm lifting. But this one time I go to spinning every Sunday. So there was a woman there who I hadn't seen before, and she happened to be like very, very heavy set. And the gym that I go to for spinning is very welcoming. There's like people of all ages and all abilities, and it's a very welcoming place. But I could tell this woman was really self-conscious. And another woman tried to correct her, like in terms of how she was setting up her bike. And it really put this woman off. Like she got very defensive. And I felt bad for both of them, because it was like
Mm,
this woman was clearly trying to help, but she
yeah.
didn't kind
Crossed
of do it
wires.
yeah, she
Yeah.
didn't really do it the right way. And then the woman got defensive, and it just wasn't good. And I kind of felt like, oh, now this woman's going to think that she can't come here because, and I noticed that she was wearing gloves, like, like lifting gloves. And so after the class was over, I went up to her and I was like, "Hey, can I ask you about your gloves? Because I've been having trouble with my grip, and I just am looking for gloves, and I just wondered what your experience was with those." And we had like a 2-minute conversation, and that was it. And I thanked her, and but I felt like by asking her advice instead of trying to correct
Mhm.
her, like maybe she would feel more like, "Oh no, I belong here." Um,
Mhm. That's
so
so great.
I
And
don't
just
know.
like little moments of just like being nice and kind to people. It takes virtually nothing and it can like change somebody's entire trajectory, you know? Um, I know, I think you were going through a list, but, and maybe we can continue to do that of like things we can do to sort of improve
Oh,
or
well, those
experiment.
were those were a couple of things. Like if you don't have relationships and you want to form some, those are a couple of ways to just get started. Um,
I have
and
a
it and
couple.
yeah, oh good. Yeah. And I don't mean to make it sound like those things are easy to do. They are not. None of it is easy to do. So if I've said those things, joining a place of worship or volunteering, if I made it sound like, oh, you can do that, it's definitely like, I just want to acknowledge it's not easy to do. But those are a couple of steps that you can start to take if
Mhm.
you want to form relationships. But if you have more, that's great.
Yeah, well, just again, some things that are sort of like recently in my mind, and you make the good point that they aren't always easy, and they aren't maybe always. Some of these things are more or less accessible, so we're offering a range of things for you to consider and think about. But one thing. That I've done recently is I've started taking this jewelry class, which I'm
Mhm.
very excited about because of my own little side passion project of learning how to make jewelry. And in doing this class, like originally, my intent was to do private classes one on one because I'm very like uh, goal oriented. And I was like, I want to learn how to do this one thing and I want to do it and I want to get done. And I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't make that happen. So I took this class instead, which of course is slower and there's other people there, blah, whatever, which anyway, it ended up being great. So it's this class of 6 people, all of whom are very different. We're all different ages, different backgrounds. There's men and women, there's, different interests, whatever. And that part's great. So I'm being social with people I never would interact with otherwise, including I ended up making a friend at this class who is this young man who, again, we're very different people, but we were sitting next to each other and we're both talkers. And so we got along really well. And he ended up inviting me to this party last week. Party, hello, who's this 40-year-old woman with a toddler? Anyway, but it was funny. We were having this conversation because he didn't know how old I was. And again, we're in this age bracket where it's like, who knows how old you are. And so he assumed, I think, that I was younger. And when I was basically telling him, like, hey, this jewelry class is like my one break from motherhood for a couple hours a week, I get to come out here and do this thing. And he's like, you should come out and you should do this thing. So he invited me to this party, this like very fancy like awards show party that was happening here because there's a music award thing going on in town. And so anyway, I have this friend who, again, I would never have organically easily been in his orbit or he in mine. And we get along super great and we have these great conversations. And I hope to spend more time with him outside of the jewelry making class. But don't discount. I think another thing as we age is we feel like we kind of have to be like siloed. It's like I have to just make new mom friends with kids the same age as
Hmm.
me, or we have a real problem, I think, in our country and our culture with kind of trying to only be friends with people who think very similarly to us or who are very similar to us. And there's so much benefit to getting to know the humanity behind people who are different from us. I think that's really good. So that could be, again, I could go off on a tangent, but the short part of that is if you have the ability or the time or the resources to like take some courses, take some classes, try something, a cooking class or something. There's free resources available in different places, some things, but you could maybe meet some new people that you wouldn't have met. And even if you don't make friends, it's just this sort of like this interaction that you wouldn't have that gets you out and kind of
Hmm.
talking to people. So
Definitely.
That's the other
Yeah.
thing. And then the
Yeah.
other, oh, do you want to say something to that?
No, just that,
Yeah.
just to follow your interests. So, and you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to have money. Like if you can join a book club, and if you don't have
Hmm.
one in your area, your library probably has one.
Hmm.
Universities often will offer, talks that you can go to for free. And you can find, I went to a book party last week that my old boss wrote a novel, and I went to her reading, and I ended up sitting next to this woman, and we started chatting, and now I'm having coffee with her. So like, just all you have to do is like do things that are part of your interests, hiking club or anything like that. There's stuff in
Hmm.
every area. You can
Yeah.
find activities, and you do something you like you did with the jewelry class, you'll find
Hmm.
other people who also enjoy those same things.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so the one other thing I wanted to mention, that I think is important and that I'm really, as a family, we're really trying to do. And this is, again, I'll put it in the show notes because Alex was telling me about some article or something he read. And it was about this concept of this goes to sort of cultural structure around community, is this idea of the third place. I don't know if this is something that is familiar to you, but the idea that in generations past, there were sort of three places to connect, be social, be with each other, or just exist as a human. It was basically at home, at work, and then whatever the third place was. So to your
Mhm,
point, there's churches, there's maybe your local bar that everybody goes to have a drink after work. There's some community rec center or some place where people gathered. Maybe it was a park that everybody went to every Sunday or something. There was a third place that people went to be social. And in a lot of places, and especially again, maybe in North American culture and Western culture, that's not really a thing, or it has moved to an online space, a virtual space. And now, even with COVID and people working from home and the changing of sort of work culture, we don't even have that second space. A lot of people aren't going somewhere even to work. So their
mhm,
only space is home. And with the way that the economy is going and how everything is so expensive, people feel like, well, yeah, I want to do this like Friday night drinks night, or I want to do this weekly get together with my friends, but literally everything is so expensive. Everything costs money. You go to dinner and that's your budget for the month. It's like things are so expensive. And, going to an arcade or going to a coffee shop, even, like, things cost a lot more money these days,
mhm,
increasingly. So that can be really tough. So what we're really trying to do is sort of bring back or bring into our world this concept of like that third space, just being outdoors somewhere that doesn't cost money. But like, if we can, especially as the weather gets better, a couple times a week, just make that effort of like, instead of coming home and eating dinner and just puttering around the house or sitting around or watching TV or whatever, to just go outside and just be together outside. And it doesn't have to be
mhm,
some big hike or some big event or some big plan or something. You just do whatever you're going to do, but do it outside. And I do feel like there is a lot of, it's very easy, especially with family interactions, to have it be this thing where it either has to be an organized, planned, formalized thing that costs money, or it's just you kind of sitting around the house. And I'm not denigrating sitting around the house. Sometimes that's nice too. But it feels better, I think, to have a
mhm,
more consistent, let's just be doing this in the sunshine or in the fresh
mhm,
air or be doing it outside. And I see a lot of cultures, like I've been to a lot of places where when you're walking around exploring a city, everybody's outside. Everybody's
mhm,
outside. And so even if you aren't best friends with the other families having their cookouts or their dinners or whatever, you're still just, you're in it, you're around it. And
mhm,
in a lot of places and where we live, it's just you got your house and you're in it. And then you get in your car and you go to your swimming lesson and you come back to your house or whatever. So just kind of trying to like loosen that up a bit, like be just be outdoors. And if you're gonna
mhm,
have the family over to see your kid for a bit, then you just do it outside or meet at the beach
mhm,
instead, or meet at the park or go for a walk or sit on the boardwalk instead of in your house on the couch. I think that, again, you get a little bit of that secondary connection of just feeling connected to the world because you're outside
mhm.
and you're seeing other people and you're where other people are. And then you get the health benefits of being outside, which is huge, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And
Um,
you were just saying about like maybe you're not best friends with that other family that's having a cookout in the same park, but you might interact with them. And again, you're
mhm,
just working the muscle. So whether or
mhm.
not you ever see those people again, you've just had that social moment with them, and it's very low stakes. But you've just, it's like doing a bicep curl. You've just done that bicep curl. So then the next time you go to work your biceps, you're just a tiny bit stronger.
Yeah.
Just to bring it all back to muscle science for women. But
You
you
gotta
just,
do it.
but you're just working that muscle. You're just practicing being social with people. And
Mhm.
if you're feeling out of practice, I mean, there's no shame in that. I mean, I think a lot of people feel that way.
Mhm.
That's just being out, as you say, and not doing self-checkout at the drugstore,
Mhm.
when you get your coffee at the coffee place, saying to the barista, how's your day going?
Mhm.
All of these things, these very low stakes interactions, it all compounds, like it all builds on itself. And the next thing you know, you're having more and more of these social interactions, and you're starting to feel a little bit better and a little bit less stressed.
Yeah. And even to connect these big kind of key things, relationships and fitness specifically, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned your spin class, like probably an element of what's nice about that spin class is that it's a class and there are other people and you get to
Yeah,
say hi and you
totally.
get to see people and you get to have somebody, maybe a charismatic or cool or funny instructor, tell you some stuff while
Yeah.
you're doing your class and it's fun. Like one of the huge things, probably in the past, if people have followed me for a long time, you've seen me kind of make fun of CrossFit a little bit. I used to be in a CrossFit. Everybody used to be in a CrossFit for a while. But one of the massive cultural changing things about CrossFit was the community aspect. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what almost everybody across the board, there's still a ton of people doing CrossFit and benefiting and loving it and great. But one of the huge things that even people who are anti CrossFit or post CrossFit will tell you is it was the community that really
Mm-hmm.
drew me in. You got to go and you people celebrated your successes and you talked to people and you had fun and you felt like you were part of something. That's massive. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why people like going to classes. That's why I really struggle working out consistently in my home gym, because even if I don't speak to another soul, I want to go where the people are to work out. I feel like I'm part of it. I feel like it's making
Mm-hmm.
me maybe work a little harder, or because I'm going to a place for that where other people are there doing it too. And it's helps push me a little bit. So there's really something to be said for, and again, if all you can do is your home gym, if you prefer your home gym, that's fantastic. Whatever fitness modality works for you is what works for you. But I think there's really something to be said for, again, getting out in the world, or adding some social aspects to your fitness program. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even if you like to walk with somebody. If you like to go for runs, do that. Join a bike group or join a running group or go to a class every now and then just to try it out. I mean, that, again, these little micro kind of social bits and pieces, I think they really add up and it's helpful. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, you can do that too.
The other thing I wanted to mention before because I'm guessing it's almost time for us to wrap up, is
Mm-hmm.
for people who have relationships that they want to strengthen. Um, Again, like I'm not an expert on this, but one thing that I have been doing that I've found satisfying to myself and also have gotten good reactions from others is, how like you're just going about your day and like someone will pop into your head for some reason, like someone you haven't spoken to in a while, or you'll see something and it'll remind you of an old friend or something like that. So whenever that happens to me now, I send that person a voice text. Um, and I specifically do voice because, again, there have been studies on this, like the difference between hearing someone's voice versus seeing a text message. There's like, again, there's something in the way we're wired that it's helpful to hear the voice. Um, it takes 10 seconds. I'll go on and I'll be like, hey, we haven't spoken forever. I hope it's okay that I'm, reaching out to you, from the blue like this. I saw this. It reminded me of you. Hope you're doing great. Would love to catch up. And that's it. It's like 10 seconds. I've literally never had someone not respond. And almost always the response is, oh my God, I loved hearing your voice. Thank you so much. It made my day.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those people I've like really reconnected with, some just texted back, the hey, thanks, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me feel good to actually reach out. And again, it's just working that muscle. So,
Yeah.
and you're not calling, so you're not like facing rejection because you're not calling somebody
Sure.
and they're going to hang up
Sure.
on you or not, or
Mm-hmm.
screen you. Um, So again, that's like, again, like a very, very low stakes, very low lift kind of way to reach out to people that you may have lost touch with, or you're not in as close touch with as you want to be.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really nice. I think, we didn't get to, we are kind of coming up to the end here, and we didn't really talk too much about romantic partnerships. Maybe we can do that in another episode. Maybe we don't need to get to it. I don't know. We also didn't really talk too much about how to manage or deal with relationships that could be detracting from your health. But I think,
Mhm.
if we have to just sort of wrap this up at the end, that's a very complicated topic, and neither of us are professionals in that area, but it's fair to say that obviously you want to put your energy and your attention and your focus into the things that benefit you and make you feel good, and contribute to your health and happiness, and not put your time and attention as much as you can into the ones that don't. And I know that's harder to do in practice than in theory, right? If we're talking about like primary partners or family members or whatever. But if we're just focusing more in this episode on friendships, like, let's put our time and attention and thought and care into the relationships we want to nurture, and kind of worry about the other stuff secondarily. Um,
Yeah.
and
There's
then,
a,
yeah, yeah,
sorry,
no, go ahead.
there's
No, go.
a, there's a podcast I listen to called Were You Raised by Wolves, which is, it's all about etiquette, but it's really, I mean, I don't care about etiquette, but the podcast is hilarious. But one of the hosts, Nick Layton, says that you have to think of your friendships like put yourself in a theater. So you are the stage. Um, and then, so who is in the orchestra? Who's in the front of the orchestra? And who is sort of in that orchestra section for you? And then who's on the first balcony? And who's on the second balcony? And who is in the lobby? And who is
Mm-hmm.
not in the theater at all? And what
Mm-hmm.
you may find as you go is that the people that are in the front of your theater, in the front of your orchestra section, have you on the second tier of the balcony in their theater. And when that happens, you have to evaluate whether you want to keep them where they are for you or whether you want to move them somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And life and relationships is a constant kind of shuffling around of people in that way. So you kind of just think about it. It's just like a way to visualize it.
Mm-hmm.
That because oftentimes, you may not be as important to someone else or vice versa. And when that happens, kind of how you decide to manage it. And there isn't a right or wrong way to manage it as long as you're being thoughtful about it. You may be perfectly fine with someone being in the front of your orchestra section, knowing that you're not even in the theater for them. That may be okay with you. But if it
Mm-hmm.
isn't, then what do you need to do to move the people up who are going to, ultimately make you feel good and feel like you're in a good relationship with?
Yeah, I love that. I like that kind of visualization technique. I think that's helpful. Yeah. Okay. And I mean, I think, again, just to wrap this all up, if there are people listening and you're still here, thank you, who are like, well, I don't feel like this is like the most important thing for like physical health. Like, yeah, of course it's great and it's good to have relationships and stuff. Um, I think it's worth thinking about it, to your point, a little bit more thoughtfully and mindfully. And what makes this one a little bit less tangible for people is, again, it's almost like when you do something active, you work out, you eat well, and you see the results in like your body, it's just a lot more transactional and tangible and easy to like understand the causality of it all. Whereas, because we are, many of us, in a culture that doesn't really encourage as much real world connection as maybe it once did, and because we maybe are all evolving, for better or worse, to be a little bit less like to have lower standards for what constitutes social connection these days. To my point earlier about when I was, alone a lot, and I didn't even realize maybe that it was impacting me. It was almost like it wasn't like it was poorly impacting my health so much as it was not allowing me to thrive. It's like that distinction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's good to remember, even if you've got everything else going and you just maybe aren't prioritizing this as much. Like, we've all had interactions where we've called that friend or had that heart to heart or had that conversation or had a important interaction with a loved one or whatever, where it was so fulfilling and heartwarming and helpful that you physically feel warm and peaceful and happy and good. Like you get off the phone, you're just like, yeah, I feel better now. That is a physical thing as well
Mm-hmm.
as a emotional, mental thing. I've had that with you plenty of times. I get off the phone with you and I'm like, yes, I'm so glad I had this conversation. I feel so much better. And that's what real good connection is. And, we should wish that for all of us all the time. And we
Mm-hmm.
can have it. It's harder for some than others. It's harder in different periods of our life than others, but it's worth pursuing. Like you said, the stuff isn't easy, but neither is eating well and working out well and getting the best sleep and minimizing stress. None of these things are effortless, but they're worth
Mm-hmm.
doing because it helps
Mm-hmm.
us live a happier, better life and show up as better people for the other people in our life. So I think that, yeah, anybody who maybe isn't prioritizing this or doesn't think it's as important can think about it that way and think that, it really is a crucial part of our health, just like all these other things that we like to think about.
No, I think it's so well put. So well put. And, mental health is physical health. It's all connected. And, as we said at the beginning, it does have an actual effect on your physical health. I mean, we all know the dangers of chronic stress, and chronic loneliness begets chronic stress. So, and then you don't sleep as well, and then you don't work out as hard, and then your food choice. I mean, all of it, it's all connected. So
Yep.
plus it's just, a question of how you want to live your life and how you want to feel throughout your life.
Yep.
So
Yeah. Well, thank you, friend. Thank you for
thank
this
you.
lovely heart to heart. Anybody who's listening who liked it, has some comments, has some thoughts, has some feedback, want to share some things, has some ideas for us, please send us your feedback to musclescienceforwomen@gmail.com. That's the number 4. Or you can send us messages. I'll put both of our websites, our social media handles in the show notes. You can reach out to us anytime. And we're just getting started. We're episode 2 in. We've got a number of other topics that we are going to dive into that I'm very excited about. So stay tuned and keep listening and reach out and say hi if you want to, because we can be part of your social network too. All right. Until next time.
Thank you.